Welcome back to LizCapism. Probably more than any other question I get asked on my YouTube comments is some version of, where did you get that insert sewing notion here? Sometimes it's genuine curiosity, but most of the time the asker is wondering where they can get it for themselves. And unfortunately, 9 times out of 10, the answer is, I don't know, or it's an antique, which tends not to be helpful. Sorry about that. My mother is a sewist and an experienced thrift shopper, and most of my stuff is adopted from her or the estate sales that we frequent together. But in the interest of answering some of these questions, and to share a little bit about some of my favorites, today I thought we'd go on a tour of my antique sewing notions, with a side order of tips and tricks for thrifting different sewing stuff. So first is this étui. Étui is a French word. There isn't really an English equivalent. I've heard a couple of different other names for it, but étui is the one that seems to get the most reliable search results. In many ways, this is kind of what started it all. My spouse and I travel to Vancouver every year, usually the weekend before my birthday, and we stay with good friends of ours who live down the street from an amazing antique store. As a birthday present one year, when I had just started getting into sewing again, my spouse bought this étui from that antique store. It's not strictly speaking a sewing notion, but because it sort of kicked off the whole thing and felt very history-boundy, I couldn't leave it out of this video. It's kind of like a Victorian lady's multi-tool or Swiss Army knife. This one has a knife, a little bodkin, a retractable pencil which still has lead in it and totally works, and a button hook. All right, fingers crossed this doesn't mess up the lav mic too much. So the next one is this absolutely gorgeous French curve. A French curve is a tool that rather predictably draws curves. This is really, really useful when you're drafting patterns or making adjustments to an existing pattern, especially when, like me, you can't really rely on your mediocre freehand drawing skills. I don't have a heck of a lot of information about it. We found it at an estate sale, and it was just amongst some other sewing stuff. There wasn't really even a lot of information we had about where the owners had gotten it from originally. It's actually a lot more wibbly wobbly, if you can hear that, than people think it is. It's still really sturdy. Like, having a metal one has definitely served me well in the time that I've been using it. I don't have a specific date for it. I have a guess. The patent date is printed on here as being September 2nd, 1891, and then there is a secondary stamp that is an engraved stamp from August 9th, 1892. So my guess, based on a very little amount of information that I have on this thing, is that the product was patented in 1891 and this particular one was produced in 1892. But I don't have a lot of solid information for that. There's as good a chance as any that it was created much later, and that's just the patent date for a different country or a different manufacturer. I don't know. Undetermined in terms of its origin and in terms of its age, but it is a lovely little piece of equipment. I tell you what, it is definitely goals in terms of the aesthetic of vintage sewing supplies, so I'm always really pleased when I can get stuff like this because it's so cool to just look at as well as being relatively useful. If the stamp on it is in fact the year that it was manufactured, it's actually roughly the same age as the étui, which is nice, and they're also color coordinated, so that's a lot of fun. All right, so my pattern weights. I have a couple of different sets of pattern weights. The ones I get questions about the most are my blue flat pattern weights in the shape of different sewing notions. They're a mom acquisition. I'm sorry, again, there's not much that I can do about it. These seem to have been pretty popular for a pretty long time in the 70s and 80s, so there's a good chance that you'll be able to find them if you start crawling through estate sales and thrift stores or in grandmother's basements. Your own with permission, please. I'd say there are two sort of subcategories of sewing notions beyond what I've mentioned already that you can find in estate sales and antique stores and thrift stores and things like that. There's the more permanent tools, things like pins, crochet hooks, awls, measuring tapes. These little bitty accessories, Altoid boxes. Heads up, Altoid boxes are where it's at. Get yourself some antique Altoid boxes, the tinny kind. Super useful. But anyways, these more permanent tools, I absolutely love talking to proprietors of antique stores about these. And I'll tell you why as soon as I put these down and try to make as little noise as possible. So these little bitty accessories like this measuring tape and this measuring tape and these buttonhole cutters and this measuring tape and there's just no way to do this on camera effectively. You're just gonna have to trust me. Cute little bone awls. I've got some really cool crochet hooks, and I've got some antique hand sewing needles and things like that in their original packaging. Unless they're exceptionally pretty or exceptionally rare or are on the larger side, they're actually pretty hard to display. Antique stores aren't usually overburdened with display space as it is. When it comes to things like this that don't necessarily display particularly well, one of the things that they end up doing is selecting a few minor, more pretty items, and then more often than not, the rest of it gets stored in boxes, either in the back or in another location. I've had several different conversations with antique store proprietors where they have brought out just boxes upon boxes of unsorted miscellaneous sewing supplies. Your mileage may vary, but what has generally happened to me is that I'll choose the items that I like and the owner will quote me a price. I would generally discourage people from spending too much time haggling with antique store proprietors, but there's nothing wrong with understanding that the prices are somewhat flexible based on their need to run a business and your ability and or willingness to spend money on their antiques. Keep in mind the relationship that you have with this particular proprietor and always take them at their boundaries, but it is a super fun thing to do. It's also possible, and depending on your needs, money, and ability to store these items, you could also offer them amount for just the whole lot or ask them for a quote. But yeah, sometimes they're really willing to do that just on the basis that sometimes they just want to get that stuff out of there because it doesn't move for them nearly as effectively as other materials in the store. And my sewing scissors, these little cutie pie orange snips and these really nice Singer shears. My grandmother owned these and my mother inherited them and had them cleaned and sharpened and gave them to me for Christmas 2019. My grandmother was an active sewist between the years of 1930 and 1975 or so. So you can imagine the kind of stuff that she collected. Not a heck ton of it is left, but the really nice tools remain, and some of them I was lucky enough to inherit. So that's where these are from. I'm pretty sure Singer still makes scissors though. I bet you could find a pretty classic, these are pretty classic versions of shears. I imagine that these are pretty easy to come by. These are a little bit stranger. They're just little tiny orange snips. There's no stamp on them. There's no brand information, which if anything tells me that they're pretty old because these days you basically can't pick up a piece of fruit without being told what the company was that sold it to you. But you know, the point is that they're super cute. They're teeny tiny. They've got this little cap that sits really nicely on them, and so they're able to hang kind of wherever I need them, but they also have that nice spring action with the attached bottom bit. I kind of really love these, and it's surprising because normally I'm not really drawn to a lot of the plastic wrapped handles and things like that, but these just speak to me in a way that I think they're just so charming and so teeny tiny and so cute and super useful. It sounds ridiculous that you would need shears and snips if you don't sew very often, but trust me, the minute that you start sewing, you do not want the giant scissors just hanging around everywhere that you are. You want to be able to have little portable scissors that can just snip thread and not have to worry about being classed as an offensive weapon, as the case may be, or even just like accidentally dropping it on your foot. True story. Yeah, sometimes you just want the little ones. Again, I'm sorry that a lot of this stuff is me just saying, oh yeah, somebody gave them to me. I'm gonna come to that. Give me just a sec. I cannot speak highly enough for grandmothers. If you haven't got homegrown grandmothers, found family versions are fine. Honestly, the biggest mistake I see people make when they're struggling to find secondhand or cheap sewing notions is that they don't ask. Don't keep your sewing hobby a secret. Don't keep your notion needs a secret. Don't keep your interest in antique notions a secret. Post on your social media, send emails, mention it at family functions. I know that this and the talking to the antique store clerk are pushing some of you introverts a little out of your comfort zone, but trust me, as a fellow introvert, it's worth it. All right, I'm gonna say it. I'm sorry, I gotta say it. It's networking. Like, that's really what it is. tell people what you're looking for, and you'd be amazed at how many people know somebody who can't even give this stuff away. So you'll take their unwanted stuff, but they need to know that. They're not just going to spontaneously know and start offering sewing stuff to people. Last, but certainly not least on this list, is my absolute favorite. It is random dead stock sewing notions. So things like patterns, the thread that I have in all of the different wacky colors. I've got like 7 different weird French curves. I've got a bunch of like old drafting books that I'm definitely going to be doing a video on. All of these things, these like bags and bags of dead stock of buttons and of snaps and weird applicator tools that I don't even know the use for, half of them, because again, sometimes you take things in lots as opposed to one at a time if people are getting rid of stuff. Rummage sales, garage sales, estate sales, charity and fabric and craft sales, vintage sales. In a lot of places where there aren't antique stores, often because the real estate prices are so incredibly expensive, you'll often find things like antique malls or antique fairs. And these aren't usually well advertised, partially because they're run by people who don't do this professionally. They tend to be doing it as a volunteer gig or as a sort of nonprofit thing. Places like community centers will often host these things, and sometimes the advertising is limited to those community center websites or Eventbrite or Meetup or something like that. I would highly, highly recommend do some searching, your city name or your region name, and then like charity sale, rummage sale, estate sale. These things, because they're not well advertised, are often not generally discoverable very easily. But if you go looking for it, if you know what to look for, it's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. And, you know, again, when we're not living in a global pandemic, they're a lot more accessible. So, and for the record, eBay does a bunch of these where maybe you're not looking for a particular item, but you want to see what you can gather. eBay will sell lots of antique sewing supplies and antique sewing notions and things like that. It's a bit of a gamble because you're not picking what's in that particular lot, and it might not be very good stuff, but it really frequently pays off if you have the time. You might not use everything, but 1 or 2 things that are useful will probably make it worth it for you. The other cool thing about getting lots from different antique malls and fairs and estate sales and things like that is that then you get to be the person who has the notions that you can pass on to people who might actually want them or need them. As always, these tips vary tremendously based on budget, location, and your personal needs. I'm going to link some Facebook groups, Instagram pages, and other places that host swaps, exchanges, open calls, or collections for things like notions or fabric or what have you. They're often happening just by local people in your area, which is why I recommend things like Meetup. Prior to the pandemic, I went to a couple of notion exchanges. There was also fabric and clothing exchanges if you're looking for things to alter or mend to practice on. That's always a good choice. So get creative, see what's around and what's available. These are just some tips and tricks for places and people to talk to in order to get the kinds of notions that you need. These really cool items that are just a lot of fun to use and a lot of fun to have in your sewing space to make the place just a little bit more, you know, a little bit prettier, a little bit cuter. But give it a try and see what's available near you. Happy thrifting, happy antiquing. I hope that this was helpful, and if not, you got to see some pretty pictures of some pretty things. If you like these videos and want to see more of them, please subscribe and click the bell to be notified when my videos are released. Currently, I upload every Saturday morning. Thank you so much to my Patreon supporters and Ko-fi donors who help keep this content available and free for everybody. If you'd like to support me on Patreon for fun perks like private live streams, advanced access to videos, and behind-the-scenes footage of ongoing projects, the link is below. I've also linked my Ko-fi page for one-time contributions. In the meantime, thank you so much, have a great week, and I'll see you soon! Oh, for crying out loud. Advanced access to videos and behind-the-scenes looks at ongoing projects. Oh, that is a long sentence.